I'm on. Welcome this morning, welcome to a special 85th service, and if you're new or visiting with us today, I'd love to offer you a very special and warm welcome. Just a couple quick reminders if I can. The foster care Christmas party's coming up shortly. If you're able to help on that Sunday afternoon with just some basic games that we see at the, we need, how many people? I say 4 people doing this. No, we just need people to run those games. You're able to help with the foster care Christmas party. That would be great if you could see Leanne. I don't think Sue's here. Let me just tell you what we do on that day. We give kids who have no joy in their life joy for an hour and a half, and we want nothing in return. We just want to spoil them for a day, for an hour and a half. So if you're able to help, that would be great. This morning I'd really appreciate it if you could talk to Leanne. Next is our celebration service disguised as our AGM, so if you're able to come next week, that would be great. And we have Randy Edwards coming to speak. I don't know, some people have heard Randy speak before. He's really great, and he's really looking forward to it. He's been speaking to me what he's going to speak about, and it will challenge you, and that will be great. He used to be the principal of the Kenmore Church of Christ Bible College. We have the food in the pantry, just a reminder to say thank you for what you've done with that. You just cannot believe the amount of food that goes through those doors on a Tuesday morning. It's extraordinary. So thank you for all your help with that. It's going. Ladies' luncheon, if you plan on going to the ladies' luncheon and you have not, you're not going. So if you'd like to go to the ladies' luncheon and you have not paid, you need to see Joy or Leanne today. So where's Joy? Because no one knows who you are, Joy, so you better stand up. So that's Joy. Do a turn. No turn. Leanne, will you do a turn? Leanne's over there. So if you'd like to go to the ladies' luncheon and you go, please see those 2 ladies afterwards. Now, we, Kerry and I, believe that some of you are lying to us. In that, we believe some of you must have taken piano lessons when you were young. Must have. There must be a piano player in this church. We're going to hunt you out. It's probably better that you come and find us than that we find you. So if you can play the keyboard or the piano, you can either be clean and come truthful, or we're going to hunt you down. So, well, no, jokes aside, if you're able to help, that would be great. We need another piano player desperately. Phil, can you play the piano? No, you're not lying to me, are you, Phil? You wish? Okay. Just a personal issue, church, if you don't mind. This week, on Wednesday or Thursday, I have been diagnosed with shingles on my head. It's excruciating, and the medication makes me very crook. So, and much to Leanne's pleasure, she's got another 4 to 6 weeks of looking after me in that place. It's been horrendous. So if you can just be patient with me, I need to be careful around those of you who have not had chickenpox, and especially around the children. So I probably will be leaving straight after the service because I am shattered already, and it's 9:35 into the service. So church, if you could be patient with me in that time, I'd be very grateful. Has anyone else had shingles? Yeah, it's excruciating, isn't it? This side? Yeah. Was that across your back? Yeah, my dad had it across your back. Well, I've got it on the top of my head. So when the wind blows and my hair moves, which it does, it sends me into the next world of pain. Right, we have a very special service today, and we are celebrating our 85th birthday. And I would suggest to you there's been times in this church where 85 years would have been somewhat seeming impossible, but we're still here. By the God's grace, we are still here. Can I play your video, please? So at this point I'd like to ask, and my memory goes, who's doing communion? Are you doing communion? Yes, please, to the stage to do communion. And as she's coming up to the stage, I'd like to remind you all, or ask you to get into trouble. After the service, Leanne's going to lock that door. That door will be locked. There'll be no tea or cake until we've lined up along here to get a photo. And it's very, very important that we keep the history of this church alive. So in 50 years, people can look through and go, I know that person, I know that person, I know that person. Because that's what I've been doing this week as a history of the church. So I know some of you don't like photos, but it's really important that we keep a record of our history for the future. So after the service, don't make Kerry and Ken chase you. Just easy to do as you're told, right? I've learnt that the hard way. We're just going to line up along here and they're going to take a photo for us. Would you do that for me and for historians in the future, please? I would be very grateful for you for that. Okay. All right, so I will need to invite the people onto the stage that are part of this morning. Take that down. You don't need to come up yet. I'll invite you.
I've never had chicken.
Haven't you?
No.
You stay away from me. Pass me my mouse, please. You have to pass that to me. So how we're going to do this morning is we're going to go through the decades from the 1930s right the way through. And we're going to have a look at what's happened in this church over that time. And I've entitled the message this morning, Honouring the Past, but Building for the Future. That we need to honour the past. There's men and women who mortgaged their house so we could sit in church today. That's extraordinary. We need to honour our past and we need to build for our future as we go into the next generations, because hear me on this, the generations are changing and they're changing very, very fast. So I want you to imagine the year is 1937. Some of you may remember. So no one remembers 1937. Well, that's all right. So 1937, they had snappy suits, they had nice shoes, the perm, look at that beautiful car, and the nice stove in the bottom right-hand corner. Does anyone remember some of that from the 60s when they bought a house that may have had that in it? So it's 1937.
In 1937 to 1938, buses were out-of-stock and involved. In 1939 to 1940, the bus was Harris Street.
So the year is 1937. And our foundation members are in someone's house and they decide in faith to establish what would become and what is known as the Mackay Church of Christ. And they did this in the home of Mr. Nielsen. Some of you may remember Mr. Nielsen. Does anyone remember Mr. Nielsen? Yeah, I've got you there, Grace. If you look in in what was the library now, the kids' room, above that room you'll see a plaque of dedication to Mr. Nielsen. In the room that day was Edgar Snow, Mrs. Snow, George Shaw, Florence Shaw, Dorothy Shaw, Stanley Bradbury, Frida Nelson and Eric Nelson. In 1937, those lovely people came together and established what would become known as the Mackay Church of Christ. In the same year, they decided to run a mission. And the mission was run in Batros Clothing Store. Does anyone know where Batros Clothing Store is? It still there? Yep. Right, in Batros, how do I pronounce it? Batros? That's what I said. Batros. Right. Batros Clothing Store for 3 months at 2/6 per month. What would that be? £2, 6 shillings or something? 6. And that was predominantly for the rent of the piano. Now, sadly spoken, there was no converts at this mission, but they made the point to say that plenty of the seeds were sown. from the mission. It was decided by those men and women that they desperately needed their own chapel. This hiring stuff was not going to last too much longer. Meeting in people's houses was not the way to do church. They had two members that they share the sacraments with. That was the Nielsen's and the Shaws. So Sunday morning they would go to the Nielsen's, alternative to the Shaws, and they would have communion, a sacrament at that time. In this decade, in the 30s, under Brother Morris, this is how all the writings got Brother Morris, who was a builder, a chapel was erected with lots of help from the congregation on Nielsen Street. Does anyone remember where this was? In Nielsen Street? Is it still there? No, it's not there anymore. So with the help of the congregation, they erected this chapel on Nielsen Street. And the time of opening this... What did I say? Nelson Street. Great to have all of you here to help me out. So on Nelson Street, at the time of opening of the chapel erected by Brother Morris and the congregants, there was 43 members. And the presiding pastor was fresh out of college from Glen Innes down in New South Wales. And his name was Bark Flash. Now, in the late 30s and early 40s, our church flourished. They had a Bible college here with 63 students. 63 students. There's a picture there of the faculty, I think. This one in the bottom left-hand corner is the faculty that taught at our Bible college. Now, when I went to Church of Christ 2 weeks ago, I had arguments with a guy who's a historian there who didn't believe me that we had a Bible college, but I've got photographic evidence, and it says it in our book. 63 scholars. There wouldn't be 63 scholars in all of Queensland now at ACOM. They also had a choir with 27 members. And I will point out, piano players. A choir with 27 singers. A Bible college with 63 students. Mackay Church of Christ was flourishing in the early 40s. We come into... I don't do sign signals, you'll have to tell me how. Yes! Children, sorry. I thought you might like my witty joke. Children would like to go to Sunday school? First one there gets a chocolate. That is a lack of parenting awareness, isn't it? That there, right there. So we head into the 1940s, and if you were in the 1940s, some of this stuff you may remember. The 40s is most well known for the war, but in the 40s, we would, if we went to church, we would sing this song. Grab a seat. How beautiful are those lyrics of that song? So in the 40s, we had...
In 1940, the pastor was Walter McDowell, and in 1941, the pastor was Bruce Allen. In 1941 to 1943, it was Jack Lawson, and then in 1944 to 1946, it was George Miller, and then in 1947 to 1951, it was J.B. Grant.
As we head into the 40s, the church is flourishing, but we all know what happened in the 40s. And we had the war. Do you know our church lost 12 members in one day? One day. We lost 12 of our members to the war. After the war, church was difficult. Life was difficult. And the church ended up becoming down to 7 members. There was rolling shutdowns, there was restrictions, and memories of the war dramatically affected those who came to church. And we headed into the 1950s really not in a strong position at all, nowhere near what we were in the early 1940s. In the 1950s, it was a struggle. And the pastors are...
In 1951 to 1955, there was no pastor, but in 1955 to 1958, the pastor was Don Palmer.
So in that 51 to 55 period, best that I can make out, the church went into, I would say, some sort of shutdown, and it was just alive, on life support, and just every couple of months they would have a special meeting in that time. But the great thing was, as memories drifted from the war, as we had the shutdowns and the restrictions that started to abate, well, the church was able to really start to grow again. And numbers grew to about 40 members towards the end of the 50s. In the 1950s, there was a problem though. You see, we needed a new organ. And there was a young man who was going down to do some work in his apprenticeship in Brisbane, and he was told to get all the information that he could about this new organ. But there was a new model, the electric organ. And when he came back, he didn't tell them about the electric organ. This led to the scandal of the electric organ in the 1950s of Mackay Church of Christ. So we bought an organ. And then the electric organ came out, and that was a far superior model. So they decided that they were going to the old organ, and they'd go for an electric organ. And that was in the 1950s, £1,450. That's extraordinarily expensive. But they wanted an electric organ, they got themselves an electric organ, and they raised the money from the church. And in the writings that I read about, the one thing they talked about was how unified the church was in buying this new electric organ. The new electric organ arrived, they were happy. And then came the 1960s. Some of you must remember the 1960s. We've got the Beatles, Doctor Who, the Cars. I think that's a Valiant, is it? No, Ford, XM, is it? I don't know, I can't tell. But the 60s arrived, and we had a beautiful new song that we got from the Billy Crusades. We come into the 60s, and our pastors for the 60s were as follows.
In 1960 to 1961, the pastor was Darryl Garlick, and in 1962 to 1963, it was Stan Van Haren. In 1964 to 1967, it was Kevin Jenner.
Now, it hasn't been difficult to find too much information in the 60s. However, one thing that I was able to determine, I think, and I'm relatively confident on this from the photos, that a group from this on a mission trip to build a well. Quite a big mission trip. You see, they went to Magnetic Island. But what we probably need to understand is to get to Magnetic Island in the 60s was probably just as difficult as it was for us to get to Vanuatu or the Philippines today. And they went there in the 60s and they built this well. This well is at a Camp Irwin, Magnetic Island. I don't believe that it was denominational at first, but lots of camps and church camps were had at this place. We then came into the 1970s, and you should by now start to recognise some of the photos in the 70s. There's Jaws, the Bee Gees. Who's a closet Bee Gees fan? There has to be some. Come on, Damien, you know the Bee Gees. No, over here any closet Bee Gee fans? Oh, there's lots of smiles there, pointing at people. Bee Gees. Was that you, Heather? Oh, yes, Bee Gees. What else have we got there? The Lakers, we've got Billy Idol, the football. I don't know who the bottom left girl is. Kiss is there. Farrah Fawcett. I don't know who she is. So, but our pastors in the 70s were?
In 1968 to 1972, the pastor was Adrian Bristol. And in 1973 to 1975, it was Hayden Francis. And then in 1975 to 1976, it was Peter Matthews.
Now, we'd been at Nelson Street, or I can't quite figure the exact dates, for around 40 odd years. And for most of that time, at least half of that time, it was commonly known that Nelson Street was just too small. Bigger. Things were changing in Mackay. Building classifications were changing. Where you could have churches and worship was changing. Where you could have businesses was changing. And there was land being reclaimed. And Nelson Street, unfortunately, just wasn't going to fit. It was time to move. So Nelson Street went on the market, and it took about 12 months before a local business, James Crook and Sons. Who knows that business? Yep, James Croker and Sons. Lucky I've got pronunciation behind me. James Crocker and Sons bought the property in Nelson Street, and our church needs to go on the move. And as God works, it just so happened that up the road, Shakespeare Street, was an old Anglican church whose numbers had been dwindling. They didn't need the building anymore. They rented it out for card games and all sorts of things. They even rented it out to parties. But in the diagram, the documents that I was reading, it did say that the parties were, underlined, too loud. And there was complaints with the council. So the Anglican Church decided that it would be best if they were to sell the building. And we were looking for a building. So we bought the property in Shakespeare Street, which is now a childcare centre, for $38,000. In my research, I was riding past Shakespeare Street on my bike, and I thought I'd go in and have a look, and I'm looking around, and next minute these two ladies came in and said, "Can we help you?" It's not good to be looking around a childcare centre as a grown man. But I was just curious. But guess what? There's better news to come. Because when they moved in, there were some trestle tables. There was chairs. Now, I'm glad you're sitting for the next part. When they moved in, unexpectedly, there was an electric stove. There was benches, gas, hot. Shakespeare Street. Well, it was the forgotten land for our church. Very, very excited. And the next 4 years we made heaps of improvements into this building in Shakespeare Street, including, not excluding, green carpet. Things were happening. It was exciting. And in this time, our membership included to around about 100 people. And we had a girls' brigade and a boys' brigade. And in 1978, a new pastor arrived on the scene in Mackay. He was known as Pastor Norm Flett and Barb. Who here remembers, I've met Pastor Norm and Barb Flett? Okay. Well, they were here for 12 years. At the end of 12 years, he actually went to the church that I came up here from, at Whitehill Church of Christ in Ipswich. Also, in 1978, this church raised half the funds, and then the Queensland government put in the other half of the funds to build a foster home where foster children were able to live, and they had foster parents who lived in that church. Our church raised half of a new house for foster kids. That's just extraordinary. It was the second foster care home in Queensland. I've got photos in the book with Bjorkia Peterson opening the house, and that's what led from there to all of the Churches of Christ care where Cindy is. Mackay Church of Christ has had a fairly major impact in the life of Mackay and Churches of Christ. Isn't that extraordinary? We come from very good heritage, amazing, compassionate church members. We must honour the past. Then we came into the 1980s. Now, if you can't recognise the thing in the middle, that's a cassette. Do you remember the cassette? My daughter wouldn't have a clue what that is. A cassette. What else? We got The Simpsons came in. We got the Power Rangers. We got Pulp Fiction was out. The game Twister came out. The Smurfs came out. 1980s was a happening time. And if we were in church in the 1980s, and you might find this hard to believe, I was greatly disturbed by this fact. But if you were in church in the 1980s, you would have sung this song and would be all upraised. God is an awesome God. Who thought that song was later than the 1980s? Yeah, it's a bit disturbing. But he is an awesome God. And our God is an awesome God has been prevalent through this church for 85 years. The newsletter that I was able to find, 31st of December 1989, we had 81 people at church that day. And our pastors were really easy for the 1980s.
In 1978 to 1989, pastor was Norm Flett. In 1983 to 1985, Tim Stewart was the associate pastor.
Now, if you have a look up there, photo, it was there. Can you go back one, please? Right. If you look at the top left-hand photo, you will notice the church is actually going that way. Nothing wrong with that, just interesting. We also had a Mark Tyro from Bible College in America, and he came out as a trainee under Norm Flett. Norm Flett was his superior, and I made contact with him this week through Facebook, and he's coming to see us, apparently. So that'll be interesting. Does anyone remember a guy by Mark Tyzo? Tyree. Right. Excellent. I've never been corrected so much in my life. You're going to be redundant soon, Leanne. But this is our big year. It's big because we moved to where we are right now. And we have someone who was in church at that time when we made the decision to move, and that's Beth Shannon. Would you like to come up, Beth? Just grab that microphone. Okay. So we're in the 80s. The pastor.
I knew Norm Flett from when I was little, way before here. And Barbie was wonderful. I remember singing with Barbie. And
I don't mean to interject, but it's happening. It's Barbara.
Sorry?
It's Barbara.
Oh, no.
I got that one right, didn't I? I got that one right. It's Barbara.
Yeah.
Okay, Barbie. Yeah.
Norm was a wonderful pastor. He was meant to come out and see us when we were out at Saltbush, which was a long way out of town, and unfortunately didn't make it. But for him to even offer to come all that way was amazing. Yeah, showed his commitment.
Tell us about Shakespeare Street. We full?
Shakespeare Street. I used to come in from Saltbush Park, which is out in Nebo. So it's like a 5-hour round trip. So I'd get there late and sneak in and sit up the back, but the church was always full, but luckily there was always a seat up the back, and I would leave early. My main memory of Shakespeare Street, apart from Ken, I do remember Ken at Shakespeare Street, yes. The one Sunday I went to leave church and Norm said, "Hang on Beth, just come up here." And I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And they were singing the last hymn and I went up and he said, "Now, how long does it take you to get to church?" And I said, "Roughly 5 hours round trip sort of thing." And he looked at the congregation and he said, "Now here we are arguing over what side of the river are we going to build the new church, because who's going to have to drive the furthest?" And he said, "This should put an end to where the church is going to be built," sort of thing. And it was a long time after that I came back here, I think it was 2006, and saw this magnificent building that they ended up building.
So there was an argument then about which side of the river?
There was an argument about which side of the river, because Mackay people don't like crossing the river.
That was the first thing Leanne and I were warned about when we moved into Mackay, which side of the river you've got to live on. Yes.
So that's my main memory of that.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, and we also have, this building was built in 1985.
Can I just say, my grandfather was Stan Vanham, the minister back in 1961, and his wife, they actually had to leave here because he took up, I think, the president of the conference, and his wife became head of nursing somewhere. But Miriam sends her love. She's my step-grandmother, but she's down in Sundale in Nambour and has really fond memories of Mackay Church.
Wow.
Thank you.
Very good. Yes. So if we got the Van Ham wrong, that's Lockie's fault. Right, where's Kevin? Come up, young fella. So, you may not know Kevin, but Kevin built this church. What?
Just Kel.
Kel. Right, Kel built this church. Yes, so...
I didn't build the church. Only God builds churches. I just put the building up.
Yeah, okay. So I'll rephrase that. Kel erected this building, right? Is that better? We say that? Now, we moved out here and I looked on the, read quite a bit about it, and when this slab was poured, it was the biggest slab poured in this area, but you disagree.
2008.
2005, wasn't it?
2008 we got flooded, 2 foot of
Okay.
water.
Yep. No, but the concrete slab.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, with the concrete floor, we dug down 2 metres to get rid of big rocks out and gravel. We reclaimed a fair bit of the land here and we put road base in. We used 3,000 tonne of road base, we put it in here. We had a D8 running back and forwards, and I had a roll we used to run over it again. And we're supposed to go to RL6. Well, I checked the road out there, the centre of the road and the rubber line under the stones was RL6. Well, it was still actually in the same height, so I made it RL61. Because when we got that road base, well, the whole lot was only about 3,200. Anyway, we got, and then in 2008, the water came up to the footpaths, we had patios, but it didn't come to the board, so luckily I raised another 100.
Yeah. Very good. So, for those who not quite sure what we're saying is the railway line is 6 metres, the road's 6 metres, and we're 6.1 metres above the water. So, if we have a flood, come on over, because we'll be 6.1 metres. Now, you would...
It's a big flood, we stand up here.
Yeah, that's right. No. Now, there's only room for one bad joke guy in this pulpit, and that's my job. So, now, Kevin, Kelly, you were telling me during the week how during the building process, men were taking a month off work. Tell us about that.
And we had 2 or 3 men here all the time. They took their annual holidays, or some took part of their long service, and worked here in the church for free. So we've got a few men here. There's only one carpenter, Colfer Sherrill, myself, and then we can lay on the job. And the whole church was just done by voluntary. And on a Saturday, we would have at least 20 men in my hall, and the amount of work they did in that Saturday was just unbelievable. You know, we put all the half trusses on right around the whole green in one Saturday, and they put all the skirt boards, the seats, witches' hats, up for the gyprock, right down, right through the whole church one Saturday. So we had some good men and well planned. It was good work. Good work team.
That's amazing, isn't it? So, yeah. Yes, you would take a month off your school holidays, work holidays, and you come and work here. And I don't think he'd be a kind foreman. Are you a kind foreman, or do you work him?
No.
You work him.
Yeah. Godly men, and it was great.
Yeah.
And you know, all the churches that I've worked on, I've learnt more on churches than I have just on building sites. I don't know why, God just gives you a little bit extra, because some people say, what do you do it this way for? What do you do that way for? And it got me thinking, and they say, wouldn't this be a better way? And I learned more in the building game from Christian brothers than I did working in the streets. So it was a good fellowship. Very good.
So do you remember how many bricks are in the building?
I don't actually. I do in some churches, but no, I don't.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yes. Well,
But all that area there in the kitchen and the toilets was supposed to be timber. But being a bricklayer, I said, no, we'll make it all bricks. and then we had Brad Fled, Norm Fled's son. He put the kitchen in and the walls and the toilets and nothing. He just paid the material. Everything was so smooth and so good, you know. Something I would like to say.
please.
This foundation, we had beams every 3 metres crossways, 600 deep, 400 wide. We had 100 cubic metres of anyway, it was a really good foundation. But I'll tell you what, our Heavenly Father in heaven, who's a great builder, he's built that many things, including us.
Amen.
But like a good builder, he also gave a good foundation. He gave the Lord Jesus Christ. And what a foundation that is, you know. And it all starts from there.
Okay, anything else you want to add?
Well, we've been involved here for the last 50 years. We've been all for the churches you mentioned today. And then the Church of Christ for 2 years in Brisbane before that. And when you sang that song, I'm going to mention, I couldn't sing it. It was so good.
Yeah, well done. So we come out of the 80s and we come into the 90s, and some of you may recognise now we're getting mobile phones, we've got the Spice Girls, Nelson, Jurassic Park. Lots happened in the 90s, including the Nintendo. And our ministers in the 90s were as follows.
In 1990 to 1994, the pastor was Gabriel Burnett, and in 1991 to 1994, it was Faye Harris, and in 1995 to 1999, it was Chris Ireland.
Right, so we found a newsletter from January 1995, and there was 131 people here for church, and the Billy Graham Crusade was up on the screens via a link. You may see the Sky dish in the backyard there, so that was just out here, and we were advertising the Billy Graham here via satellite. Did anyone come to our Billy Graham? No? Okay, that's all right. And that brings us to the end of the 1990s. And we come into the 2000s, and things are starting to get a little bit heated up now. We've got Shrek coming to the 2000s. Oh, surely you all remember Shrek? Yes. So in the 2000s, we had a song that came out. That was a great song, written, I believe, by... can't remember. But Leanne and I had this song at our wedding. Oh, and if you could be thinking. Well, the Y2K bug didn't blow us all